I'm Rebecca with 1C, and this is Silent Crash. In the last episode, I told you about billionaire Dan Gilbert and the role he played in destroying Michigan's auto no-fault system that was successfully taking care of 18,000 catastrophic car accident patients at zero cost to taxpayers. Their care was covered by the MCCA fund, which everyone paid into when they bought car insurance each year. The fund had $23 billion in it, more than enough to pay for the medical bills of those 18,000 people for years. I promised to dig into other characters in this true horror story, people like Detroit Mayor Mike Duggan, Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, and state legislators like Senator Lana Tice and Senator Mike Shirkey. The work to uncover the money that is changing hands behind the scenes is ongoing. I'm digging, I promise. It is layers and layers of greed, deception, lying, self-interest, and backroom dealing. As I talked with people and peeled back those layers, I learned that a couple of weeks ago, the Republican Caucus of the Michigan State Senate held a meeting. Now remember, it is weirdly the Republicans who have led the charge for decades to impact the contracts between individuals and their insurance companies. I say weirdly because part of the Republican Party line is keeping government out of the free market. Yet that is precisely what they have championed and successfully pushed through with PA 21 and PA 22. This reform uses the power of the state to make null and void parts of the agreements that private citizens held with their insurance companies. It's bonkers, really, from a Republican Party platform point of view. Republicans are supposed to be about allowing the free market to regulate itself, to keep government out of private market dealings. So why did Senator Mike Shirkey, Senator Lana Tice, Representative Jason Wentworth, Representative Dare Rendon, and other elected officials apparently use quite a bit of their political prowess and connections to write and pass PA 21 and PA 22? That's what we've been trying to get to the bottom of. Now, if I were a cynical human being, I'd say that those individuals care more about the interests that the insurance lobbyists bring to their attention every day than they do the interests of their constituents. With $23 billion in the MCCA fund and $100 million of that going out every month to take care of patients, it's easy to see why the insurance companies wanted auto no fault to go away. They wanted to stop paying out $100 million each month. They wanted to stop having to account for such giant liabilities on their books. See, that impacts how those books look to banks and other lenders. They wanted that $23 billion back. That's what I'm being told. And to do all of that, they would have to get rid of the system that relied on it, the auto no-fault program. See, the more I dig, the more I think that is the primary story behind PA 21 and PA 22. There are a whole lot of other little stories, sub-stories, subplots, as we call them in storytelling, that were happening to enable that big goal to be reached. And we'll dig into those. We already have dug into one of them in the form of Dan Gilbert. But the big story, I think, is that insurance companies did not like the auto no-fault system. Well, I mean, that's well documented and known, and it has been known since the inception of the program in 1973. They don't like it because it impacts their profits. And they've had the ear of Republicans on this issue for a long time, too. Because while corporations don't vote, they do donate. That's money that I can and am following. But let me get back to this little tidbit I was told just this week. The Republican Senate Caucus held a meeting a couple of weeks ago. At this meeting, Republican senators were voicing their growing alarm at the outcry over PA 21 and PA 22. They've been listening to Silent Crash. They're also getting calls, emails, and in-person visits constantly. They're hearing about people like 23-year-old Jake being forced into a nursing home and losing care. They're hearing about that 10-year-old little girl in Detroit having to catheterize her own father every day. They're hearing about the patient who was dropped off in the ER, later discharged, and never heard from again as she had no place to go. They're learning about Brian, who had recovered enough from his accident to have built a full life. He was employed and living in his own home before the reform legislation. But when PA 21 and 22 went into effect, Brian's healthcare company was forced to close. Without in-home care, Brian was forced to go into a nursing home. He's been hospitalized 5 times, twice with sepsis. He's now in a second facility. His job? Long gone. The benefits from that job? Also gone. They're hearing all these stories and more. So these senators came to the caucus meeting asking their leadership for direction and answers. The blowback from this legislation is getting out of hand, they said. We need to do something now. At the top of the do something list is the need to clarify that this reform should never, ever have been retroactively applied. That was not their intent. That retroactively applied, that means that the 18,000 existing patients in the system were not supposed to have been affected by this legislation. I have the legislation here myself. Its labyrinthine language seems almost designed to confuse, but I am clear on this. There is nothing in this legislation that requires it to be retroactively applied. The entity that made the decision to retroactively apply this legislation was not the legislature. Apparently, it was the insurance companies, many of whom are members of the Insurance Alliance of Michigan. Now, the Insurance Alliance of Michigan pays an abundance, some might say overabundance, of lobbyists. On the About page of its website, the IAM states that it is, quote, a unified voice for the insurance industry, representing the majority of auto, home, and business insurance companies operating in Michigan, end quote. They call themselves, quote, a trusted source for policymakers, opinion leaders, and the media, end quote. And they make sure to note, quote, we've also been at the forefront of the fight to reform Michigan's broken, outdated auto no-fault system for drivers paying the highest auto insurance premiums in the country, end quote. Don't miss that last part, listener. That wording speaks volumes. Michiganders were not paying the highest auto insurance premiums in the country. We've covered that here on this show. Detroit and a couple of other outliers were. And Detroit's mayor decided to make that a statewide Michigan problem, with help from his billionaire friend Dan Gilbert. Now, not only are the people of Detroit losing their health care, but so is the rest of the state. But, like I said, we went into that in the last episode. What I was struck by since then is the piece of information I got about that Republican Senate Caucus meeting, filled with senators who came to find out what the party intended to do about this growing roar of patient and healthcare worker voices. I was told, and it was confirmed directly to me by a Republican senator who was there, that the insurance industry reps spoke at this meeting, and that they told the senators gathered that the patient stories they are hearing are simply not true. Other insurance industry representatives told the senators that healthcare workers are simply not losing their jobs, and that healthcare companies and other businesses that served the catastrophic car accident patient population have not closed their doors. Those are lies. I know they are lies because I have personally talked with patients, their caregivers, and owners of the companies that have shut down. On this show so far, you have heard from Laszlo and his caregiver, Candace. You have heard from Jake's mom, Tricia. But there are more.
My name is Chalise Wilson. I'm 43 years old, and I am from Otter Lake, Michigan.
Chalise's brother and mom were in an accident on February 19th, 2008.
My mom is Marcy Wilson. She is 70, and Clarence just turned 50, September 26th. My mom, I wasn't there, but my mom, sister, and brother were at her house, and my mom was going to Walmart for something. And as she backed out the driveway, my brother ran out and said, "I'm going to ride with you, Mom." And they went to Walmart.
Chalise was at work when a friend called to tell her he had seen what looked like her mom's car on the news, wrecked. Chalise did not know what he was talking about. She hung up and tried to call her mom. Her friend dropped off his wife at Hurley Medical Center where she worked. He decided to check just to be sure. And sure enough,
well, it was about 15 minutes past, and my phone rang again, and he says, "They're here." He says, "They got hit by a semi."
Chalise's mom had hit a patch of black ice on the interstate's on-ramp. She slid into the median, bounced back into traffic, and then, a few seconds later, was hit by a semi-truck.
They were both in ICU in 2 separate rooms. My mom was not awake. She was not coherent at that point. So I walked down to Clarence's room, and he was awake. He was in there, and he was laying on his stomach, and I'm not sure, because some people have asked me, why was he laying on his stomach? And I really don't have an answer for that. I mean, I didn't know anything about broken necks or spinal cord injuries or anything like that at that time. And when I walked in the room, he said, "I'm so uncomfortable. Can you please move me?" And I said, "Clarence, I can't move you. They said, your neck is broken, so we can't do that." And he says, "But I can't move my body." And my heart just sank. I thought, oh my gosh. I still wasn't thinking that he wouldn't be able to move for the rest of his life. I just, things happen. Everything after that is like in the next hours, and maybe even the next couple of days, is somewhat of a blur.
Chalise's mom had a head injury.
So my mom was in the hospital maybe a month. She was discharged, and she sustained a head injury, and she had some broken ribs. And when she got discharged, she couldn't walk, like her brain or feet, the things were not communicating right. So she would just do the oddest things. She fell often.
Clarence spent 7 months in the hospital before being sent to Colorado for further treatment. He spent 6 months there before returning home. So he's been with you since October 2008?
Yes.
And have you been his caregiver that whole time?
Yes, it's just not me. He, as I mentioned, he's 6'3", and he weighs 260 pounds, so it's not something we can do alone. He does require 2-person care. So between myself, my sister, and my oldest brother, we were an integral part of the team, but we also had to have help from an agency.
And so when he came home, is he still paralyzed from the neck down?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So, but how's his brain injury? Can he talk? And
he is. He doesn't always make the most rational decisions, but
hey, that's all of us.
Yeah.
Let's just be clear.
but his mind is there. He's coherent. He knows what's going on.
It takes multiple people working 24/7 to take care of Clarence, people paid for by the MCCA fund.
Takes a team of 12 of us. And that's a combination of the RNs and the home health aides.
When I first started hearing about and meeting patients and their caregivers, I would hear numbers like those and think, gosh, somebody must be gaming the system. 12 people? How in the world are 12 people needed in this situation? So I asked.
I've encountered that quite often. People just don't understand. Well, I would just say, if you can imagine, and there's different levels of quadriplegia, so everyone doesn't fit in the same shoe. But in Clarence's case, he's paralyzed from neck down. So he has a slight shoulder shrug, but that's about it. So if you can imagine, he is dependent on someone for everything, from the simple things that you and I don't think about, like, wiping our nose or drying our eyes or, those things. But on top of that, because of his quadriplegia, he also has a suprapubic catheter, which is an indwelling catheter into his bladder, which allows him to urinate. So that has to be maintenance throughout the day, because otherwise it could get full or back up, or it could be kinked. Just a number of things that could happen. He also has a trach, as I was speaking about. So he needs to be able, if he has secretions or anything like that, we need to be able to suction him to remove those secretions. He also has a colostomy bag, which is, he's unable to go and sit on a toilet and use the bathroom. So this colostomy bag is where the feces would go. And of course, that has to be changed and even managed throughout the day, because things like gas, it's a bag. So if it fills up with air, then that air needs to be released, or yet you can have quite a mess.
How does he eat?
He can't. He's dependent on someone to eat, so we have to feed him. We have to get him up. He can't just lay in the bed, otherwise his body will break down. So if he's in the bed, even when he's in bed, he still has to be moved on a regular schedule, position, turn, and things like that to prevent breakdown. Or not just skin breakdown, but also pulmonary function. If you're just laying still, then there's more of an increased chance that you'll get pneumonia or something like that. So he's dependent on someone for everything. There's nothing that he can do without the help of someone else besides speak. And even that is dependent on someone, because he has a trach. So it has to be capped in order for, it's in between your vocal cords in your throat. So in order for him to speak, it has to be capped with a speaking valve so that you can understand what he's saying.
I was being told in a previous interview today, actually, that one of the representatives had said about a child who was in not this condition, but in a condition where, dependent on others for life. That representative said, well, you should have just let them die, which to me, I can't fathom thinking that, much less saying it out loud. But I know he's not alone, because I've heard it. So I think it's important that people understand, this is a human being we are talking about. This is your brother.
Absolutely.
And you still can sit there and talk with him. Yes.
We sit and talk. We sit and reminisce about, times before. It's the little things like that help them keep going. I mean, if you pretty much lose everything. I mean, just to back up, because I've heard that too, Rebecca. In fact, someone made a comment to me like, well, who would want to live like that? And my response, I mean, first of all, that's your personal opinion, right? But the bottom line is it's not up to us.
Right.
God didn't take him. Mm-hmm. He left him here. So you can't just let people suffer until they expire, because in Clarence's case, even if he wanted to take his own life, he couldn't. He doesn't even have the ability to do it. Mm-hmm. So he's a very viable human being with a mind, and killing him, because that's what essentially they would do, is murder. Mm-hmm. He's when God decides that it's time for him to go, that's when he will go. And until then, what do you do? I mean, that's just, it blows my mind when people say things like that, because that could be, I don't think that you would feel the same way if it were somebody that you cared about. If it were you, or, you're not you directly, but them, if it was their child or their husband or their mother who had an unfortunate circumstance, because a lot of most of the cases, the survivors aren't at fault. They just happen to get injured.
Yeah.
So if you just happen to get injured and your body doesn't work, but your brain and your mind is still working, because he still has a heartbeat. Mm-hmm. He still wakes up every day like you and I,
He wakes up every day just like those insurance lobbyists do. The ones who told the senators 2 weeks ago that stories like Clarence's just don't exist, that they just aren't true. They also said that businesses aren't shutting down. Healthcare workers aren't losing their jobs. There's no shortage, but
the end of May, I got a letter from them that said, on June 30th, we can no longer provide care for your brother. And my heart sank. Like, what are we going to do?
The letter Chalise got came from their insurance company. I asked her if the care team for Clarence has changed since she got that letter.
Once I received the letter, I was in contact with Clarence's case manager. I was in contact with Clarence's PMR, his physiatrist. What PMR is, his physical medicine and rehabilitation doctor. And she is basically the individual that monitors his care. She takes care of his medication. She takes care of his rehabilitation needs. She writes all the prescriptions and so forth. I cannot get a hold to her. She was on vacation or something or another, and our prescription for care had expired. So I couldn't even get a new company. I didn't have a script. So I finally got a prescription, and between Karen, Clarence's case manager, and I, we probably called 32 different agencies in the state of Michigan, and none of them would accept Clarence's case because of the changes of the auto no fault. They couldn't. They don't know what they're going to get paid. There were so many unanswered questions.
Unanswered questions. I wonder if the Insurance Alliance of Michigan hears that. This is the legislation that they championed, that they paid their lobbyists to help create and get passed in the middle of the night, that they spent millions of dollars to support. This is where they chose to spend their time, their effort, and the money that they took from their customers. They spent more of that money to send their people to Lansing to meet with the Republican caucus and tell them that people like Clarence and Chalise don't exist. And what was the other thing that the IAM said at that caucus meeting? Oh, yes, that healthcare workers aren't losing their jobs, that healthcare companies aren't closing their doors. There are plenty of healthcare workers still out there, they said, happily living on 55% of the pay they had in 2019. But what was that Chalise just told us? How many did you call?
32.
32 companies to provide what for Clarence?
For them to provide in-home services for the RN and the home health aides.
And none of them could add him as a patient because, understandably, they're saying we can't function. We can't stay in business.
That's correct.
Only getting paid 55% of what we got paid in 2019.
That's correct. And then when I eventually, there is a company where Clarence lives. He's not the only injured person. He has his own unit, but there's other individuals out there that are injured, and not just auto. It's a specialized housing, so they have lifts and things like that. There is a company there, Advisor Care, who was providing care to another patient out there, and I went to them because I thought, okay, they're already out here and they may already have staffing. Maybe they can help. And they offered to help, but they said, we don't have any staffing.
So who can work at 55% of pay?
Exactly. So if you can bring your own staff, then maybe we can help. Well, everybody didn't go. Everybody couldn't transfer to the new company because this is a new company and they have new rules and new. So, for example, one of our nurses is a diabetic, and so, she needs her medication. And if she went to the new company, she would have to wait a year before she could get health benefits.
What's she just supposed to do? Pay for her meds for a year when insulin prices are skyrocketing too?
Exactly. So we lost, her. And she was one of our primary nurses that have been there for the longest time, that know the routine. And then we lost another one. Then we lost 2 aides because there's a pay decrease. Mm-hmm. So I started making phone calls, Rebecca. I was reaching out to everybody. Anybody who had ever worked with us before, anybody that was familiar with Clarence. And I pieced a team together. It wasn't a whole team, but I pieced it together. And I said, can you call Advisor Care? Can you go and apply with them so that they can put you on Clarence's case, and so we can make this happen? I was dying. I was there day in and day out, and I knew I couldn't do it much longer. I have a son myself.
How old's your son?
He's 8.
Wow. So, you kind of have to be present for an 8-year-old.
Exactly.
Wow.
And he's familiar, because this is what he knows, because mommy has been doing this since he was born. Mm-hmm. That's what we have now. It's far from perfect. It's not ideal. When I'm not there, Clarence calls me because he's concerned about his safety. He's concerned about the amount of people, the different people that are showing up. I mean, we are still in the midst of a pandemic. Yeah. He's super vulnerable. Yeah. I've had conversations with people about masks. I mean, just building blocks on top of building blocks, day after day, issues. I worry about him because it's not just, you can be a nurse and you can be a great nurse, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't mean this specialized. This is specialized. Mm-hmm. And if they haven't been exposed to it, it leaves Clarence at risk, because you have to be able to recognize certain things. You have to know the difference between he's sleeping snore and he's passed out snore. Mm. Mm-hmm. And these are only things that you can recognize by being around. And so when you have a revolving door of people in and out, it's just extremely risky. And, I know people in a worse circumstance than Clarence, because everybody doesn't have family. And even if they do, everybody's not willing to do it.
Yeah. So you did not have this revolving door before the cuts.
No.
But the cuts have created a revolving door because there aren't enough people now who can afford to stay in this business, working in this business, because they're not getting paid. And your family members who can do this, y'all's hours are cut now.
And they're not being paid no one. Our insurance company hasn't paid the family nor the agency since July 1st.
Really?
Nothing. Zero.
So how is everyone keeping the lights on?
That's why I say I never know what tomorrow may bring. I'm on pins and needles because I fear that my phone is going to ring and it's going to be advisor care and they're going to say, we can no longer do this because we haven't been paid. I'm no mathematician, but I do know numbers, and it doesn't take a genius to add and subtract. And what they're asking these companies to do is truly unreasonable. You can't squeeze water from a rock, and that's what they're trying to do. On top of the change, I mean, healthcare has been in a crisis for quite some time. There's a shortage of workers across the board. So this has just worsened it because now you're asking them to pay even less.
Does this sound to you like there is no problem? Does it sound like the patients are okay, like their caregivers are okay? Before we turn from Chalise, I think it's also important to hear her words for the other people who were in that room 2 weeks ago. That would be the elected officials, the senators, who heard the insurance industry lobbyists tell them there is no patient or worker problem.
I find myself at the Capitol begging. I'm begging and crying. Very vulnerable, very, very vulnerable position to be in for something that belongs to us in the first place.
Let's take a short break while the good Republican senators of Michigan take a moment to reflect on a woman left begging and crying for them to stop inserting the state into her private contract with her insurance company. Welcome back. As I was putting this episode together, I was sent a video. It was a news piece with Simon Shaquette at WXYZ TV, Channel 7 in Detroit. He was covering the group We Can't Wait's recent protest that they held outside the offices of the MCCA. In the piece are some remarkable statements from Representative Joe Bellino. He's a lame duck rep, finishing out his third term in the House. He owns Broadway Market in Monroe, which is about 45 minutes south of Detroit, down the eastern side of Michigan. In the piece, Representative Bellino says, quote, "I'm not listening to their lies. Everybody's being taken care of right now," end quote. Okay, well, we know that's false. You've heard on this very show how people are not being taken care of. But Representative Bellino went on to say, quote, "Here's the problem. The providers are getting paid, but right now they're not getting paid what they want. They're not getting 10 times the Blue Cross Blue Shield rate for a simple medical procedure," end quote. That's false too, and I'll address it more in just a minute, but first I can't neglect to share with you what this Republican lawmaker said next. Now, again, I'm neither Republican nor Democrat. I'm just amazed by some of the things going on. Republican Representative Bellino begins to extol the virtue of an additional government involvement in the private business relationship between healthcare providers, patients, and insurance companies. Hear this, listener. This Republican lawmaker presents the solution of bigger government by saying, quote, "If they're short somewhere, they can apply to the state. The state can give them back some money wherever they're short in the fund." Does Representative Joe Bellino know that a tenet of the Republican Party is keeping the state out of private contracts and business? Does he know that? He sounds very much like the mayor 45 minutes to his north, Democrat Mike Duggan, when he's advocating that the state get involved in private business contracts and dealings. I mean, several individuals have shared with me about the power and reach of the Insurance Alliance of Michigan. I began this episode by telling you how they told senators at that caucus meeting that Chalise and Clarence, Tricia and Jake, and more simply do not exist. But to get a sitting Republican Michigan State Representative, Joe Bellino, to so enthusiastically and vehemently espouse a position that is the antithesis of his own party's platform, to say that the state is the business owner's solution? Wow. Boggles my mind. Anyway, where was I? Oh, I said we'd get to the falsehood of Representative Bellino's other statement. Quote, everybody's being taken care of right now. Here's the problem. The providers are getting paid, but right now they're not getting paid what they want. They're not getting 10 times the Blue Cross Blue Shield rate for a simple medical procedure, end quote. Okay, I have learned a few facts about insurance companies and their systems and all this digging. And here's a big one. Insurance companies were not paying more for a procedure than they wanted to. They either offered a lower rate to the provider or they took the provider to court. They did not just pay a price they thought was too high. That's not how the system worked. Yet, claims of gouging the system are something the IAM has pushed for a very long time. They use it to undergird their claim that reform needed to happen. They've said it so much that elected officials repeat it in interviews and on the record. It's something the IAM is still pushing, despite being asked by numerous individuals and organizations to supply any evidence, any at all, of systemic gouging or even episodic gouging by post-acute care providers. According to Tom Judd, he's the president of the Michigan Brain Injury Provider Council, the IAM has never publicly supplied one single shred of evidence, not one actual example of a post-acute care provider gouging the system. What, are they giving that proof to representatives and senators in secret? That would make zero sense for both them and the representatives and senators. Maybe they haven't released proof because their claim, like their claim in the Senate caucus 2 weeks ago, isn't true. Let's see.
My name is Karen Amick. I live in Bloomfield Township, Michigan, and I operate and own a case management company. I have done so for 30 years. Case management is a service that's provided. I service automobile accident survivors, and the service is really to keep rehabilitation moving. And I kind of explain it to people almost like a wagon wheel. I'm at the center of the wagon wheel, or the case manager is at the center of the wagon wheel, and the spokes are the doctors and the treatment providers. And we keep track of all of the spokes and just keep that wheel moving and make sure the rehabilitation is moving forward in the best interest of the patient.
I sat down and talked with Karen because clearly she will know if there has been an impact to the part of the healthcare industry that was caring for catastrophic car accident patients. Karen started out as a teacher. She thought about going into special education, and in her quest to explore that, she was assigned to help car accident patients reintegrate into school.
So if you were in a car accident and you were in school at the time, you were trying to get your degree, perhaps you're not able to take notes like you used to or remember things like you used to. So I would come in and I would teach compensatory strategies to help you continue with your education, or I'd contact the school and say, what special services can you offer this person to help them?
She went back to school and she earned a master's in psychology. She focused on helping people with PTSD and traumatic brain injury. And then Karen was in a car accident herself. She had to have shoulder surgery.
So obviously couldn't drive, couldn't get to appointments, and that's a big part of the role. So I hired a person who took over some of my cases, and then I hired another person and another person. So my roots actually come from something good that sometimes a very odd twist of fate. And, I call them blessings in disguise, that at the time I couldn't see it that way. But when it happened and something grew from it, it was fantastic. And it's been a very worthwhile service.
Her employee numbers ebbed and flowed from a low of about 15 to a high of about 22, depending on the care that was needed at any given time. They served over 200 patients. I asked Karen if her invoicing or financials have changed since PA 21 and PA 22 went into effect. She started by telling me how things worked before those acts became law.
For adjusters to chisel here and there, to look at our bill closely, and their job, quite frankly, is to adjust the bill. Their role is to look at how can they save money, and what would be some cost measures that they could take to decrease the overall cost of the claim that they're managing. Before the reform, there was chiseling. Now, you couldn't even say there's gouging. You'd have to go further. I'd have to have another vocabulary word for it.
I asked Karen to get specific if she doesn't mind sharing. Now, as a business owner myself, I know what I'm asking is intrusive, but it feels important to hear right from the mouth of a person who owns a business that was serving catastrophic car accident patients and whose invoices are often paid from MCCA funds. It was important to ask exactly how her company financials have been impacted by PA 21 and 22.
If I look at I recently went through August and September, and my account receivables are down 85% in August and 90% in September. So maybe not zero, but pretty darn close. So I'm getting about maybe 10%, at maximum 15% of what would come into my company on a regular basis, on a regular monthly basis.
I wonder if Representative Bellino could keep his Broadway market open if he had to keep providing goods and paying employees, but only get 15% of the revenue for 4 months. I wonder if the insurance lobbyists who told Republican senators 2 weeks ago that business owners like Karen aren't being affected, could they live on 15% of their pay for the past 4 months? I wonder if the Insurance Alliance of Michigan could afford to pay its lobbyists' salaries at all if the IAM suddenly had to survive on 15% of its typical revenue stream. And if none of them can, I wonder why they thought people like Karen and companies like hers could. I mean, it's one thing if your insurance company folds. It's quite another if the people who are turning your body every 2 hours so you don't get bed sores and flushing out your bladder so you don't get an infection and die can't come anymore. And it's still another thing if there's also no one else who can come do those things. I thought about those patients as I tried to wrap my mind around the massive impact to Karen's company revenue stream. How is she staying in business?
So I planned ahead, and so there is cash reserve available for a period of time. But as the clock keeps ticking, I have to reevaluate closely as a business owner. I'm looking at, do I continue and take out a loan? Do I personally liquidate some retirement and try and replenish it and put it back, within that 6 months that I might have to do that? Do I stop providing services at the level that I'm at, or the level that the company is, the volume?
This woman is literally thinking about liquidating her own retirement account to keep her employees paid so that their patients are taken care of. To stave that off a little longer, she has let go all of the employees who weren't doing direct patient care. She's taken on all that administrative work. And with the reform, it's even more paperwork than usual. The load is considerable.
I've taken pretty much the role of most of my employees. My operation manager's gone, clinical director's gone, and have taken those roles on myself. And they're not unfamiliar roles to me, but it is now working not just my position as chief executive officer, but I'm chief executive officer, answering the phone, forwarding messages, looking at billing, correcting any billing issues that might be there, talking to adjusters regularly, forwarding whatever taxes need to be forwarded. I'm a one-man show in the sense of the administrative aspects. So I've just adopted all of the administrative and the operations on the whole.
And even as she wears herself out doing 5 people's jobs, she can't stop thinking about her team and their patients.
I had a wonderful staff. I had a staff that was family. So this wasn't just, wow, we've lost so-and-so. My staff has stayed with the company for decades, and this was their retirement. This was their health insurance. This was their families. This was their children, their children's education. People forget the ripple effect, that sometimes can happen. And it's very difficult, as probably any business owner could appreciate, to find a team that you all work in tangent.
Oh, gosh, it's gold.
Right. And so when you have that rhythm and you have that positivity and you have this really nice office and people just care about each other, to see all of that change, it's been difficult. I've definitely had my days of grieving, whether that's been grieving a system that was a beautiful system, that I got to see people get the care they needed and rehabilitate to the highest and optimal, or the system was there for them. And there were so many great stories of success through the money that had been put into this fund for people who were catastrophically injured. And so for me to be able to pull out of my toolbox, the ability to advocate for services that they needed and get them these services and have them regain a quality of life, and to watch that process, it was amazing. It's amazing to go to a hospital with a 9-year-old in the ICU and see them come out and not remember their name or the name of their sister, only to see them 12 months later flourishing because of a system that's been there for them. And it gives you chills, and it's an incredible job to be the eyes of hope, I've called it, so that when I was able to walk into a hospital and sit next to a parent and they're thinking my child's on a breathing tube, I need to say goodbye to my child. And I could stand there and tell them, let me tell you what I know. Let me tell you what I've seen. And I think at that moment in time, for a parent to have someone come in and say, there is real hope. And there's reason to believe that your child, much like when they were born to the time they were 12 months, you saw that continuum. There's every reason to believe that continuum will be there for your child now. And what an incredible gift to give someone.
It was a gift that Karen and thousands more just like her could regularly give in Michigan. It was not a gift given in other states, because other states didn't have the gold standard that Michigan had, that auto no-fault system. But in Michigan, the gift of hope based in realistic expectation of recovery was there. But not anymore. Not since PA 21 and 22 took effect in July. Since then, despite what Jeff McKelvey and others advised the senators in that caucus meeting, life for these patients has indeed
we're having happen
changed.
As an industry is we were becoming the state that was making milestones that people had not always experienced and seen in the medical field. For instance, I was starting to see some of my patients that were wheelchair bound because of a spinal cord injury start to walk. And I can't think of anybody that has ever experienced, been around somebody with paralysis, family member who wouldn't want to see their loved one walk again, and that incredible milestone. And that was actually starting to happen. Did that take more physical therapy sessions than would be the norm for the normal population? Absolutely. This isn't surgical recovery. This isn't, probably, 3 months of physical therapy and you'll be fine. This is catastrophic injury, and it's different. And so it did take more sessions to be able to get a person to that threshold, but that's what the fund was there for. People in the state of Michigan voted on something to put a fund together and put money for anyone who was injured in a car accident and have this catastrophic fund so that it was dedicated to helping people achieve these types of milestones. And they were. And there's so many stories. It's not just spinal cord. It's the person who has a brain injury that is now working productively, who is teaching, virtually, or teaching at a level that nobody expected. Now, they're teaching compensatory strategies that they know, or they might be teaching about disability rights, something they're well versed in. The point being that they regained a quality of life, that was kind of the promise. That's what the fund was there for.
Until the insurance companies finally got their way and destroyed the system. So while I continue to dig and follow the money, while I thank my lucky stars that others are coming alongside us, even in this huge research effort, I wanted to also make sure that the Republican senators who acted so weirdly out of line with Republican business ideals to create and pass this legislation, I wanted them to know, without any doubt, that the insurance lobbyists lied to you that day. Business owners are impacted. Healthcare workers are impacted. Patients are impacted. You've heard their stories here. Keep listening. There are more, and they won't stop until this is fixed. The eyes of Michigan are on the state legislature and the governor. They can make this right. Will they? We're all watching and listening.
Follow and subscribe to Silent Crash, the quiet unraveling of Michigan's auto no-fault and the destruction of lives, wherever you listen to podcasts. For more information on what you've heard here and how you can help, visit silentcrash.net. Silent Crash is a production of the 1C Story Network. The show is written by Rebecca Seitz and produced by her and Rebecca Bond Tucker. Post-production services by Zischer LLC. This show is supported by the generous donations of concerned individuals via the Silent Crash GoFundMe effort. Learn more about the 1C Story Network at just1c.com. That's JUSTONEC.com.
The 1C Story Network, for the love of stories.